families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Families Divided. In this edition, attorney Jordan Trager will be speaking to us on the legal tips and advice for those who are alienated grandparents. Lots of good information, so take notice. We also have Dr. William Burnett, who will be sharing with you what he will be presenting at our upcoming fall conference, September 9th through the 11th, which is a virtual conference for those all over the world. I do hope you'll join us. Registration ends September the 4th. So please hurry and register. Looking forward to being with you. We're going to have all this information coming to you right after this message.
At Victor's Crown, our focus is on you, our clients. When you arrive, our goal is that you will feel at home, from our welcoming atmosphere to our serene surroundings. Everything we do at Victor's Crown is done with our clients in mind. We have comfortable seating areas for both adults and children. A large screen TV with surround sound where clients can be occupied with wholesome entertainment while they wait. We offer complimentary refreshments such as coffee, tea, water, and snacks. Due to the present COVID pandemic, our in-person appointments are restricted to selected cases, and those are held in our luxurious outdoor open-air meeting space that we affectionately refer to as the COVID Cabana, which was built specifically for our clients to offer them the most comfortable and relaxing outdoor space available. All our other clients are offered secured web-based telemed sessions where they can connect with us from anywhere in the world.
I'm Dr. Bill Burnett in Nashville, Tennessee. The title of my presentation is New Research Helps Us Understand How Alienated Children Think and Feel. In the last few years, important research has occurred which addresses some of the details of parental alienation theory. This research will help us communicate better with children who are alienated, whether we are evaluators, therapists, or parents. And I'm going to give you some quick examples of the research that I have in mind. It's been known for many years that alienated children lack ambivalence or engage in a severe level of splitting with regard to their parents. That means that they perceive one parent as totally good and the other parent as totally evil. Recent research has been able to document this splitting in an objective manner, which is a very important accomplishment. Second, it has also been known for many years that there are levels of severity of parental alienation, that is, mild, moderate, and severe. That means that the alienation manifested by the child may be mild, moderate, or severe in severity. Of course, usually it starts with a mild level of alienation and sometimes progresses to moderate or severe. In this research, my colleagues and I have been collecting drawings and other artwork made by alienated children, in which we can see the progression from mild to moderate to severe levels of alienation. This artwork helps us look into the mind of the child in order to understand how he is thinking and feeling. A third type of research has not yet been accomplished, but I am hoping that forensic practitioners will try to get it started. This is what I have in mind. Many therapists and alienated parents have described how some children transition very quickly from having a normal, loving, satisfying relationship with a parent to being extremely oppositional, belligerent, and hateful. Sometimes this transition happens within a matter of days, but some practitioners have described that occasionally it happens even within a matter of minutes. It seems to me that different areas of the brain and different nerve pathways are activated in these different mental states that are so different from each other. I'm proposing that neuroscientists try to demonstrate these two mental states by using functional MRIs with these children. And that's a type of brain scan to demonstrate that their brains are operating differently in these two states. In my presentation in Durham, I hope to show that these research projects are important for several reasons. For example, if we understand how the child's brain is functioning, it will help us shape our communication, our manner of communication with them. Secondly, we need to understand how these mental mechanisms work in order to design interventions or treatment programs for these children. And finally, thirdly, this type of research helps us prove that parental alienation is real. It is not a hoax. It is a serious mental condition that affects thousands of children and families.
Hello and welcome to this segment of Families Divided. Today we have with us attorney Jordan Trager from New York. Welcome, Jordan. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. So we're going to jump right in and start talking about grandparents and their rights in visitation. So after a grandparent has checked out the laws in their states, what would you suggest that they ask an attorney that they're seeking, if in their state they do have grandparents' rights, to make sure that that attorney is somebody that can actually help them through this process?
Well, one thing they should ask is whether the attorney has done grandparent custody or grandparent visitation cases in the past. Even though there are a lot of attorneys that practice matrimonial and family law, not all of them have represented grandparents in the past. So it's important when speaking with an attorney on a grandparent case to find out if they've ever done grandparent cases, because the laws are different for grandparents than they are for parents.
I see. And so that would be really important that they pick a lawyer that actually has experience and not just one that chooses to practice in family law.
Right. Grandparent visitation obviously is a little bit different. If you'd like me to go into that a little bit, I could tell you some of the differences.
If you wouldn't mind, just kind of like lay that out for us as to why that is a difference between what family law with a mother and father and a grandparent.
Sure. So prior to about, I would say 1966, I would say, grandparents really did not have any kinds of rights. It was only parental rights at that point. There were a handful of situations where grandparents, did come into exercise either, what I would de facto means basically not necessarily legal, but either custody or visitation just by virtue of the fact that a parent would put the child with the grandparent or let them visit. And then the laws started to develop around 1975, where the court started to recognize a separate right for grandparents for visitation and in some circumstances custody as well.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. So as an attorney working in the field of PA and with grandparents, what are some of the biggest challenges that grandparents face in getting the visitation, since they do have this history where they now can?
Well, the kinds of cases where we see grandparents are typically seeking either is seeking parenting time. I'll give one example. I'll give two examples actually. One is where one of the parents is deceased, and either the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law will cut off contact between the grandparent, between that grandparent or grandparents and the children, even though the grandparents have had a relationship with the child or children for most of the children's lives. And then the second scenario that we see that comes across is when there's a falling out between the grandparent and his or her own child, and you have an intact family, and that intact mother and father will sever the relationship between the grandparent or grandparents and the child or children, even though the grandparents have had a long-standing relationship with the grandchildren. And that's where the grandparent cases typically fall into those two categories.
So the ones that fall into the category of where the parents have divorced and they've now the children aren't coming to see them anymore, are those more difficult to help the grandparent than the other cases where the parents are still intact?
No, I don't think that it's necessarily more difficult. I think there's a different dynamic. In some ways, if the grandparent's own child is opposing the visits, in some ways that can actually be quite difficult. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Sometimes there's just falling outs between grandparents and children. And the question that the courts typically look at, there's a couple of things they look at. One is they look at the relationship that the grandparents had with the children prior to that falling out. The quality of the relationship, the number of visits. They typically will look at it from the viewpoint of the child rather than the grandparent, and what is in that child's best interests. So if the child has had a relationship with the grandparent for a considerable period of time, and that relationship is suddenly cut off, and it appears to the court that it's done either out of spite or maliciousness or some other reason, those are normally the types of cases where a grandparent can go to court and convince a court that it's really against the children's best interests not to have this relationship that they've had for most of their lives.
So if the parents are still intact and the child of the grandparent is the one that says no, those would be a little harder to try or to bring to the court than if there's a divorce and the child of the grandparent supports the grandparent having the visitation with the child and there's a history of it.
Right. Well, it's always easier to get grandparent visitation when one of the children is supporting the visits. So if at least one of the children supports the visits, that definitely makes things much easier. Sometimes what happens is you have situations where a child may, for a variety of reasons, we'll say a parent for a variety of reasons, is unable to exercise parenting time either because of a drug or alcohol problem, a mental health problem, or a number of other reasons. And they will try to use the grandparent as a conduit to get that visit. Conversely, sometimes the grandparent wants to see the children, but is blocked from doing so because their own child has this issue. So they will go and they will seek a separate petition for that. And in those kinds of cases, we really need to convince the court that the grandparent isn't being used as a way of facilitating parenting time between the parent with the problem and the children, that it's really the grandparent's own independent interest that they're seeking, and the child's own independent interest in having that relationship with the grandparent. So that is one of those circumstances.
Oh, okay. So So the court just likes to make sure that everything's on the up and up, and that nobody's being used as a middleman when the court has said that it would be not in the best interest of the children at the time to see the biological parent. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, well, the up and up, I would just characterize as they want to make sure that the children are safe,
Mm-hmm.
and that the court orders are not being circumvented by, a petition that's being brought in bad faith. If the petition is being brought in good faith by the grandparent, they're much more likely to get a favorable outcome.
I see. So, and you and I talked earlier about this, and I find it a very intriguing conversation about what happens when the grandparent hasn't actually ever met the grandchild. Like there's a divorce, and the child's being kept away, or even an intact family and the child's being kept away. What kind of is the recourse for them at that point?
Well, at least in New York State, one of the things they're going to look at is the efforts that the grandparent has made throughout the years to try to see the grandchildren, to try to have a relationship with the grandchildren, whether that is trying to go over the home or filing legal actions in courts, or basically a showing of the efforts that grandparent has made to get the relationship. If the grandparent comes in and they haven't seen the grandchild for 6 years, and they say, well, that's because mom and dad kept me away, and I were to ask, well, what efforts have you made to get this relationship? Have you tried to go over there? Have you tried to call? Have you sent birthday cards and Christmas cards? Have you gone to court? And if they really haven't made that effort, it's going to be a very, very difficult case. But conversely, if that effort is shown to be made, then a case could be made for grandparent visitation under those circumstances as well.
So, is that true with all grandparents' rights, or is that a very unique thing to New York?
I can't honestly speak to other states. There are 50 different states with 50 different laws. As you have stated, that someone should from their own state should speak to an attorney, inside their own state about the particular laws. However, I would suspect there are many states that follow similar types of rulings, only because, as a matter of equity and a matter of common sense, if a grandparent makes efforts all along to try to see their grandchild, their case, of course, is going to be stronger than if they've made no conscientious effort. And if we do have grandparents that come to us, one of the things that we do advise is to constantly make efforts to show the efforts that have been made, because that can only help. You don't want it to appear as if it's harassment. Nobody wants to have the police called or anything like that. But, sending cards and gifts and, other things like that, other efforts, the more that can be done within the confines of the law, that, without breaking the law, certainly the better for a grandparent case.
So even if they sent a card and it got returned, at least that is still evidence or proof that they've been trying to reach out.
Absolutely, that is. And sometimes we have people that come in here with a bag full of returned letters of birthday wishes and Christmas cards and all sorts of things, and the cards are constantly being turned away, by the parent who is blocking the contact. And that is certainly evidence that could be used in a grandparent case in a court.
So when I'm thinking about reaching out to the grandchildren, I'm thinking about COVID over the last 2 years. How, if all, has COVID impacted grandparents' rights in your experience?
Well, it's affected parent and grandparent rights quite severely. Here in New York, at least, when COVID first started, you had the courts essentially almost shutting down, in a sense, and just not being able to do much of anything. They were dealing with a pandemic. And there were a lot of cases where parents who did not want either the other parent or the grandparent to have any contact with the children used it as an opportunity to alienate the children, an opportunity to cut off the visits by saying that it was unsafe or dangerous. And it really exacerbated things. And then the second thing is that when these matters did eventually go to the court, they were going much slower. The court system did slow down considerably because they were dealing with these legal issues in the middle of a pandemic. So as we know in parental alienation cases, the slower that cases go, the easier it is to indoctrinate and for that to solidify. I almost refer to it as, setting like cement, the alienation. So the longer these cases go on, the worse for the parent or the grandparent, particularly a grandparent. And so COVID did make the numbers of these alienation cases shoot up exponentially. And we've gotten, in my office, at least, we've gotten many cases for both parents and grandparents who have been, alienated during COVID. And it's unfortunate.
So since the jury's still out on whether or not we're completely out of COVID or not, I guess we'd have to go back to a little bit of our previous conversation about if we end up going back into a lockdown. I guess the advice would be for the grandparent to continue to reach out to the child, sending cards, letters, in any other way that they have an ability to contact them. Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate. And I would also add that the courts are much better equipped to handle grandparent and parent alienation cases now than they were 2 years ago at the onset of COVID. Most of the cases prior to COVID were done in person. As a result of COVID, what's happened is most of the conferences have been virtual. And I suspect that's the case all over the country. And there are systems that have been set up and put in place so that if we do go back into a lockdown, that the courts are in a much better position to deal with these types of cases. There's also a much greater awareness of COVID, of what it does, of what it doesn't do, the dangers that it presents. So at the beginning, there was a lot of unknowns. There may have been months that went by when there was no contact between a parent and a grandparent and the children. And now we know better that, within a matter of a week to 10 days or whatever the time period is, that the COVID is gone and they can go back to the visits. So the alienation that we've seen that went on for months is really, in my mind, the courts are not going to excuse that today because they have a better understanding than they did 2 years ago.
Oh, well, that is great news. And so I guess that kind of transitions me into my next question here is, okay, suppose we do get a court order that says that the grandparent has rights and they can see them on this day or that day. What happens if they can't exercise the visitation in accordance with the order? Like, what is their recourse?
Well, I guess the question that could be broken into two categories. One is if the grandparent has let's say a physical inability to exercise the order. And then a second question would be if the order is being violated by the parents who are not following it. So obviously, if the grandparents have some physical inability to exercise certain rights that they have been given by the court, their attorney would then petition the court, advise the court of that inability, and try to reshape the visitation order so that they can maximize the grandparent time that they have, and to refashion that order. Unfortunately, as with parents, in grandparent cases, orders are routinely violated by alienators. And they have the same kinds of remedies that parents have if their rights are being violated. Motions, the typical kinds of remedies that we see in the kinds of motions. Unfortunately, it is harder with grandparents because they do have do not have the same rights as parents. Their rights are somewhat less. So those orders are more difficult to enforce, but they are nonetheless enforceable.
I see. So I guess one of the takeaways from that is that the alienator stays the alienator. If they're gonna interfere with the parents' rights to see the child, then they're gonna also interfere with the grandparents' rights, regardless of whether there's an order or not.
Well, sure. This is well known that an alienator typically not only alienates the other parent, but alienates the entire family of the other parent. You know, they're looking to sever the relationship with the entire branch of the other parent, their grandparents, their cousins, their siblings. I mean, this is very well established in parental alienation cases. So it's no surprise that if an alienator is going to alienate a parent, that they're obviously going to do the same thing to the grandparents as well.
Right. Well, that is just, I guess that's just a long journey for the grandparents and the parents that has to continue on through the legal system until such time as there's some other way to deal with this, and really have the orders enforced to the best of the court's ability. Well, we are out of time, Jordan. It has been great to talk to you and get your feedback and your knowledge on grandparents visitation and grandparents' rights. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future.
And I want to thank you for inviting me to speak today as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today. And don't forget, if you need prayer, send us your prayer requests, and we'll stand in belief with you as we commit to praying over those requests. We thank you for spending your time with us today, and we'll see you next time on Families Divided.
Next week on Families Divided TV, Dr. Don Hubin, president of National Parents Organization, speaks to us on shared parenting. We owe it to our kids.